describes a tough moment in Jesus' life that we might like to skip. What makes it so difficult is how harsh Jesus sounds, especially to someone who's coming to him for help. We can understand him being harsh with the Pharisees. We get that. But with a woman coming to him for help to heal her daughter. And at first he refuses to answer her, and then he denies that he has anything at all to offer her kind. And finally he compares her to a dog before her faith changes something in him, and he decides to answer her prayer after all. The problem is that she's a Canaanite. She's an outcast whom observant Jews will have nothing to do with. She comes from the coastal region of Syria, whose people worship strange gods. She's a Gentile, which is the biblical term for anyone who is not a Jew, and as such, they are outsiders and they are unclean, and you are to have nothing to do with them. Earlier in Matthew, Jesus himself warns his disciples to avoid Gentiles, reminding them that they have been sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Well, the only catch is that the lost sheep do not seem to want to be found. In spite of Jesus' attention to them, they're not rushing to respond to his shepherd's call. Furthermore, in today's story, he has just recently come from his hometown of Nazareth, where his friends and his family have doubted his authority and take offense at his teaching. Not only that, he has just heard about John the Baptist being murdered, and he's tried to withdraw from the crowds for a while, but remember, the crowds follow him and he feeds them, and then there's the storm at sea, and Peter wants to cross the water. Everywhere Jesus turns, he finds people who want what he can do for them, but who remain blind to who he is. He's at the end of his rope. He's all used up. And then comes this Canaanite woman, begging him to heal her daughter. Just one more person in the long line of people who want something from him. Only this one does a shocking thing. She calls him by name. "O Lord, Son of David." And it's the title that's reserved for the Messiah, the title that his own people have refused to give him. And when this woman addresses him as the Son of David, she names something in him that even his own disciples have failed to see. It must seem like a mean trick of fate to Jesus to hear what he most wants to hear coming out of the mouth of someone that he least wants to hear it from. So he doesn't answer her. Enough is enough. You got to draw the line somewhere. Why should he help this foreigner when there is so much need in his own community? I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she will not stay on her side of the line that he has drawn between them. Kneeling, she says, "Lord, help me." Now, I can imagine his blood pressure went up a little bit about this. Didn't she hear him? He just said no. But she ignored him. And so he says it again, more harshly this time. "It's not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs," he says. A cruel rebuff. Now, since Jesus was a human being as well as the Son of God, it seems fair to guess what was going on for him. He's discouraged. He's weary. He's a long way from home. And every time he turns around, somebody wants something, but at the same time, nobody wants what he most wants to give them. Himself. Himself. Namely, in terms of who he was for them, and not just in terms of what he could do for them. It's not hard for us to imagine how that feels, is it? To be surrounded by people who want your money, who want your time, who want your gifts, but who seem uninterested in who you really are. It's not hard to be confused about what you're supposed to do, how much you're supposed to give, and worry about whether there is enough of you to go around. Telephone rings. It's the disabled American veterans selling light bulbs. Or it's the fire department recruiting sponsors for handicapped children. Good causes, all of them. And every day's mail brings more pleas for help from every cause under the sun, from animal rights to the environment to child abuse, Native Americans. You gotta draw the line somewhere, don't you? You have to decide what you can and cannot do, who you can help and who you can't, or you'll be eaten alive. And you might not even be missed, because everything you have is not enough to feed the hunger of the world. That's the point most of us reach, isn't it? And often we decide to draw the line around our own families and our own friends, around our own church, around our own community, around our own concerns. And we draw the line. And like Jesus, we may lose our tempers when outsiders try to cross it because they're challenging the limits we've placed on ourselves in order to protect ourselves. Strangers show up saying, "Help me." We draw the line that separates insiders from outsiders. It's not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs, we say, or something like that. And it sounds harsh, but what are you going to do? You have to draw the line somewhere, don't you? But this woman won't budge. "Yes, Lord," she says, to the man who has just called her a dog. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table." And when she says that, Jesus' anger dissolves, and something in him is rearranged and changed forever. A change you can hear in his voice. "Oh, woman, how great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter is healed. The line he drew between himself and her disappeared. The limits he placed on himself vanished. And you can almost hear the huge wheel of history turning as Jesus comes to a new understanding of who he is and what God has called him to do. He is no longer Messiah only to the lost sheep of Israel, but he is God's own chosen Redeemer of the whole world, Jews and Gentiles alike, beginning with this Canaanite woman. And through her faith, he learns that God's purpose for him is bigger than he imagined, that there is enough of him to go around. And in that moment, there's no going back to the limits that he knew even a few moments before. It looks like answering God's call means that he can no longer control his ministry or narrow his vision. There's no more safety or certainty for him. No more guarding against loss or hanging on to his cherished notions about the way things should be. Faith works like a lever on him, opening his arms wider and wider until there's room for the whole world in them, until he allows them to stretch so wide that they're nailed on a cross, because he teaches that God's embrace is for everyone. Isn't that the way it goes? Over and over, God's call to us means pushing old boundaries, embracing outsiders, giving up the notion that there's not enough of us to go around. And we may resist it. We may even lose our tempers, but the call of God is insistent as this Canaanite woman who would not leave Jesus alone. The call of God keeps after us, calling us by name until finally we step over the lines that we have drawn between ourselves and someone else. And we discover a whole new world on the other side. Think about all the lines that have been drawn this past week, just in the news. Think about the continuing turmoil between the Israelites and the Palestinians. That hasn't changed since Jesus' time. The mess in Libya and Syria as lines are drawn between religions. And that isn't limited to there. I hear stories of members here who have gone to other churches, other Lutheran churches, and have been barred from having communion because you don't believe the right way. And what about this past week with the killing of the black man in Missouri, the young black youth in Missouri? What about that? And what about the racial divisions that we continue to have in this country? And we think of Robin Williams' death, that we continue to say that he committed suicide when he actually died from severe depression, and how we continue to draw lines between what are acceptable illnesses, meaning physical, and mental illness, which we don't talk about because it's too embarrassing. And how can you have a mental illness and not be able to pull yourself up and take care of that? We continue to draw those lines. And lest we think that we are exempt from that, let us think this morning about what are the lines that we have drawn as people here, Salem and Deerwood. Who are the people that really aren't welcome here? Because we may think their sins are greater than ours. Or they don't live the way that we think they should, or maybe they're not the same economic status that we are, and it's just a little bit embarrassing to have someone who dresses like that or smells like that be in this building. And I hear from so many of you that you rue the fact that we're all lake people in here, and where are the Deerwood people? In fact, how many of you live in the city of Deerwood? Can I see some hands? Oh, a couple of you. Welcome. But and I know that many of you rue that and don't want that to be, but it is, and we need to ask ourselves, why? What are the lines that we have drawn between ourselves and anyone else? Because whenever we draw a line between ourselves and someone else, we have put Jesus on the other side of the line. Because the Syrophoenician woman, the Canaanite woman here, erased those lines forever for Jesus. There are no lines. There are no lines. And whenever we put them up, Jesus is on the other side of that line. The best lesson, I suppose, that we learn from this text is that God's face can turn up anywhere, especially on the other side of the lines we draw. God's face shows up in the face of a Canaanite woman. God's face shows up in the face of the poor. God's face shows up in those who are suffering from mental illnesses, or in any of the other faces that turn to us seeking help, seeking relationship with us that we are reluctant to give. The call of God is insistent, and whenever we limit who we will be to other people, or who we will let them be to us, God gets to work, rubbing out the lines that we have drawn around ourselves and calling us into the limitless space of God's love. Oh yeah, we might draw new lines. That's sort of the way we are. But none of them can last very long, because that is the way it is when God calls people out. And once God has called us out, there's no going back, because God never calls us back behind our lines. What does that mean today? It means noticing the difference between the times we hang back and cling to our limits cling to our ideas about who's in, who's out, who's acceptable, who's not, pushing us into new and often frightening territory. And it's a difference you can feel. It's the difference between withdrawing from people, failing to meet their eyes, keeping a tight rein on your feelings, protecting yourself. It's the difference between that and putting yourself in the paths of strangers, of those who are different from you. Being the first to extend your hand in welcome, aching with empathy for a world in pain. It's trying new things. It's changing your mind, even about how you define matters of faith, what you believe about God, about yourself, and about others. Changing your mind as Jesus allowed his mind to be changed by a Canaanite woman. It can be a painful experience. As painful as it was for Jesus to hear a Canaanite woman call him Lord when his own family would not. As painful as it was for him to step beyond tradition, religious tradition, and respond to her faith. It's as painful as it is for any of us to step over the lines we have drawn to protect ourselves so that we can explore unknown terrain. Let go. Step out. Look a Canaanite in the eye. Ask an outsider what his life is like. Trespass an old boundary. Enter a new relationship you would never enter into. Push a limit. Take a risk. Stop playing it safe. You have nothing to lose but your life the way it has been. And there's lots more life where that comes from. And if you get scared, which you will, and if you get mad, which you probably will too, remember today's story. With Jesus as our model, as our Lord, God calls us to step over the lines we have drawn, not because we have to, not even because we want to, but because we know that it is God's own self who waits for us on the other side. Amen.